it's the Stitches, and today we're going to review this vintage zine. So I have a few vintage zines in my collection that I'd like to flip through. I was actually going to do all of them in one video, and then I started making my notes for this one, and the notes for this one is like 3 pages long, so I think I'll do them all individually, and I'll do them flip through style so that we can actually see everything in here. So the first zine I'm going to be doing for you guys is called 19 by an individual named Sabrina. This is the only identification we have of this author. And she states that it's written between September 1996 and March 1997. So, late 90s. So this zine is a printed reproduction put out by Riot Grrrl Press. I don't know if it's still called Riot Grrrl Press, but I will put the information down below. You can tell it's vintage because it has somebody else's address on it. If you didn't know that this is how they used to do it, back in the day, you would order zines from a physical mailed catalog that people in the underground would mail to each other. And then when you were like, ooh, that zine sounds interesting, you would write a letter to that zine person, including the either like whatever payment they asked for. It'd usually be like $1 plus stamps, or like whatever the weight of the stamps was. But like stamps were always important, and there was actually like a lot of stamp gluing going on back in the day, which is highly illegal. But yeah, they'd mail you the zine just like this, and it would just be like stapled shut along the edges, and she actually says lots of staples to get out on the edge of this because, you know, supposedly she'd stapled all across at least the copy that this copy is made from. So I think that that's kind of a throwback for when you find vintage zines like this. So our intro here is her, you know, taking the first page to basically say that she's going to be wholly unapologetic about being herself for the things that she has to say in this, because she's been silenced by too many people in her life. So, good way to start a Riot Grrrl zine, I think. And then, right next to that, we have this article called I Saw a Dead Guy, which was really just sort of a little, like a diary passage. And she said she wanted to make this her intro for the zine because everything I ranted about when I was 19 seems a little less important after today. If you didn't get that the zine is called 19 because she was 19 when she wrote it. So I think that that's kind of an interesting way to start this zine. You'll find that zines from the 90s are a lot more unapologetic when it comes to talking about things that we would typically put trigger warnings on today. Like, there are no content warnings on this anywhere, but she talks about some pretty deep and heavy stuff, if you couldn't tell by my content warning. So next we have a spread that is a couple of works about feeling voiceless and having a desire to make your voice heard. The first one is about some microaggressions that she experiences, particularly men asking her why she creates zines. And then this next one over here addresses an actual sexual assault. And these are both very emotional pieces, but obviously, you know, the second one is much more emotional than the first one. And then on our next page, I actually thought that this poem was No Doubt lyrics. It's written to very closely resemble the Excuse Me Mister song by No Doubt. But I looked up the lyrics to that song, and that is not what is written here. This one is a lot more almost violent, but I like this a lot more. I think maybe she wrote it as a response to that song because No Doubt was considered very feminist. But back in its heyday, I also really like this like yo-yoing picture. You can never really tell what the girls and pictures in these old zines are doing, because they've just been like photocopied so many times that like, is that, what does her shirt even say? Is that like a Mountain Dew shirt? Like what's going on here? I think that's a yo-yo. I hope it's a yo-yo because I just said it was a yo-yo earlier. So if it's not, I would be very embarrassed. Unfortunately, also another thing about these zines is that you tend to get little bits cut off. This isn't the worst one in this zine, but it is kind of unfortunate. And then the next little poem on this spread is entitled "Your Voice Can Hurt Me." It urges the audience to take control of their voice and stop using it to be hurtful. It's a very anti-bullying piece. It's basically, you know, some of the jokes that people make may be funny to you, but if your jokes are victimizing oppressed people, it's really not funny to them. So maybe stop making those jokes, type of thing. This is a very popular sort of argument nowadays, and a lot of people have really mixed feelings about this sort of message. But I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to be sensitive about who you're writing about, especially if you're trying to make jokes about oppressed individuals. You know, I think in the nature of it, comedy is comedy, and you can really joke about anything you want, but you still have to be smart about it, and you still have to be tasteful about it. You can't just like be a jerk. And that's really more what this piece is saying. It's more like, hey, don't be an asshole. This next piece, this poem, from what I can read, it's really great, but I can only read maybe about a third of it. I don't think people really considered how terrible these would look after being photocopied over and over and over again. But here it is, and here's how it looks, and it's not good. So, but then this next piece over here is really good. It talked about sex and self-love and self-pleasure, and how, you know, slut-shaming really probably shouldn't be a thing. It's just a really sex-positive piece in general. It talks a lot about embracing your body, loving your body, that it's okay, it's allowed. You know, you don't have to be ashamed of anything that comes naturally to your body. And that's a really good message, especially for this time period. There really weren't a lot of people saying that. There wasn't anybody in the media, in the popular media, saying that. So it was really you know, up to girls and these zines to like teach each other that, hey, you know, all this stuff that we're so ashamed of is really okay. So next up, we start to get to some of the more traumatic pieces in this scene. This first one, it seems to be sort of like a breakup piece. Sabrina urges herself to respond to this breakup though with self-love instead of hatred. Probably one of my favorite line is, "Love is loving me," and "dependence has eaten my insides up." So she's really talking about how her lack of independence has sort of made it difficult for her to exist without a partner. But now that her partner has left her, she needs to work on loving herself and feeling fulfilled in a single relationship with herself. And, you know, that's something that still hits really true to home for a lot of women. You know, women aren't really taught how to be their own person. They're taught, you know, you're gonna get a husband and you're gonna have kids, and then this husband and these kids are going to fulfill you, when men are largely taught to be fulfilled by themselves and their careers. And the fact of the matter is that every person, every individual should be comfortable with themselves, independent of anybody else. And that's how it should just be. And this next poem is called "I Just Want to Be With Her," and it's probably one of the most traumatic pieces in here. So this poem really discusses how domestic abuse can hurt families, and it's just a really powerful poem just in general. Over the course of her poem, it's revealed that she doesn't have her biological father around, but the mother remarries, and the stepfather winds up being abusive, and then this causes the mother to sort of become distant, and over she's saying, I just want to be with her, I just want to be with my mom, I want, you know, to be just me and my mom, I wish, you know, it could just be me and her. And then over time she ends up feeling like she loses her mother to this abusive background, and that even her mom loses herself. Like her mom, she reveals later on in the zine that her mother had some issues with some substance abuse, and it doesn't say it in here, but it does, like, you know, if you're in that abusive situation, yeah, a lot of women do turn to substance abuse, and a lot of women do just sort of, you know, just go back inside themselves and sort of become like, you know, a shadow of themselves because they're just so beaten down. And if you're the child in that situation, you know, you lose not just your dad for being abusive, but you also lose your mom for, you know, her not really being able to stand on her own 2 feet in that situation. But then in the last stanza, she finds like a new mother figure in the writing of other women, and how that gives her a new sense of self and confidence, and regaining that sort of maternal need, the need to be mothered and the need to be supported in that way. So the next page is the 10 steps you can take as a woman to support feminism. So obviously love yourself, communicate with other women, respect yourself, respect women, use your voice, take action, help end sexism, gain and use knowledge, remember to think and act safe, know that girl love isn't man hates, and it says, last but not least, make your own list of things that you and other women can do to support feminism. I thought that these were pretty standard. These are pretty standard things that a girl would say about feminism in the 90s, so I'm not really going to read through too much of this. And then the next piece is, sometimes words really suck. And this one got pretty real as well. It also talks a lot about bullying, but then it talks about how that bullying can sometimes turn into sexual violence for women. She talks about how she's bullied for developing early, growing breasts before the other girls her age, which is something that hits really deep for me because that was me exactly. I got my first period when I was 9. I got my first training bra when I was like 8. So I had to deal with my body being sexualized way sooner than any girl should have to. So I know exactly how that feels. Luckily, I've never been sexually assaulted by anybody. I've been very fortunate in that regard, but I have been sexually harassed over and over again by my male peers, and she talks a lot about that in this. So if if that's something you relate to, know that you are definitely not alone there. But yeah, this particular piece hit really hard for me. And then the last big juicy piece, this is probably the most traumatic piece in this. And sadly, it is also the one that has the most cut off over here. We can't really read this stanza over here, unfortunately. It largely just rehashes a lot of the things that were said in this poem. It does just sort of elaborate on a few extra things. And then it goes on to discuss some of the sexual violence that she experienced. So basically, this whole piece of prose is talking about how various abuses against her have affected her sense of self. And then she goes on to say that she wants to heal in the 3rd stanza, and that she plans to do that by reclaiming her body and using her voice to speak out against all of the people that held her back in the past. I really like the ending. She says, "This may seem petty, But I am the one living in this body every day, and I am the one who chooses what's important for me. So where do I go from here? I guess that's up to me. I think it's time to believe in me. And then the last little piece is honestly just really nice and cute and pure and wholesome. It's basically just a poem dedicated to her best friend. And it just thanks her for always being there. And I think this poem really highlights the need for female friendships, the need for that girl love that Riot Grrrl talks about all the time. Because it's really helpful to surround yourself with other girls who have been in their shoes, in your shoes. It can be really healing to be able to have somebody in your life who's like, hey, I understand, I've been there, I know exactly what you're going through, and to be able to relate to each other in that way is really important and really powerful. I think overall this scene has a huge emphasis on that sense of self and the reclamation of personal voice. You know, she talks about using your voice and losing your voice and reclaiming your voice in basically every single piece in here. And I think that is something that's was really important to girls back then, but also important for 19-year-old girls. I feel like every 19-year-old girl has gone through a lot of these emotions pretty intensely, because that's just a time in your life where you're becoming the person you're gonna become, basically. And so she had all these lessons to learn, and this was really her reaction to learning that in the context of her womanhood. And I think that's a really powerful thing. I really love zines that explore that type of thing. And I really like this zine. I would say go buy it, but it is from the 90s. I will link down below the shop that I bought it from, and maybe she will still have copies of this. I really enjoyed this piece. I'm glad I got to share it with you guys. I hope everybody has a good day, and I hope everybody reads some zines, and I will see you all next time.